Story 1. On January 11th, 2013, I was out riding snowmobiles in the Bear Lake area near St. Charles, Idaho. The snow conditions were awful and the avalanche danger was extremely high, but being the powder chasers we were, we went ahead anyway. Right after lunch, we headed back to a hill we always rode on and decided to give it a go. I led the group, dropping off the ridge and into the bowl, chasing the best powder. Unfortunately, I triggered an avalanche, which swept me down the mountain and buried me under 2 feet of snow in the valley. I was with 3 friends, one of whom rushed down to find me using a beacon and probe, locating me about 7 to 8 minutes after I was buried. As the avalanche took me down, I sustained severe injuries, including compound fractures in both femurs, my left arm, a broken shin bone, bruised ribs, and some soft tissue damage. While trapped beneath the snow, before my friends could rescue me, I experienced my spirit leaving my body. I felt completely weightless, free of any pressure, heat, cold, or gravity. Just absolute, perfect comfort. Even the clothes I was wearing seemed lighter than air, like they were no longer there. I remember floating above my body, about 5 or 6 feet in the air, looking down and seeing myself lying in the snow, even though I was buried. I felt an unshakable sense that everything would be fine. For some reason, I knew I needed to return to my body soon. It felt like my body needed me to leave momentarily to fix something, but it would soon be ready for me again. As I floated there, I vividly remember seeing both my grandfathers standing beside me, one on each side. We didn't speak verbally, but we communicated in a deep, soul-to-soul way, perfectly understanding one another without words. Although we didn't say anything, it felt as though we had communicated everything already. We were entirely on the same page. I also remember being incredibly connected to the natural world around me. Everything, from the trees to the sky, seemed to be in harmony with me. The trees, especially, felt like they knew me, as if we had some mutual respect as living beings. I could sense that the trees were looking at my body with concern, but they were not sad for me. Instead, it was like they were sending me positive energy, cheering me on to survive. I don't recall any specific moment of transitioning back into my body. I just woke up. Even though I was broken and injured, what bothered me the most was the sensation of being squashed into a physical body that no longer fit. It felt like my spirit was a circle being crammed into a container that was entirely the wrong shape. At some point between being out of my body and waking up, one of my friends found me, cleared my airways, and I began breathing on my own. He didn't perform CPR, but said he felt compelled to simply wait for me to come back. The recovery process took years and more than a dozen surgeries. Since then, nothing in my life has been the same. Having experienced the freedom of being out of my body, returning to this physical form feels like being trapped. Life now feels temporary, and I'm just pushing through it to get to the other side. This story was shared anonymously and took place in 2013. Story 2. From the ages of 3 to 8, I had an imaginary friend named Mr. Cardine. He would take me out of my body and tell me about things that would happen to me and my family. I could also see other beings, but I couldn't see Mr. Cardine himself. When I was out of my body, I could watch people having conversations and listen in on their plans. It was frustrating that others didn't believe me when I told them what was going to happen. Mr. Cardine was always kind and never scared me. I thought everyone knew him, so I would talk about him freely. Eventually, I became a target for teasing and bullying because no one believed my stories or that I had an imaginary friend. My mother grew worried when I would tell her things that came true. Her concern led her to consult a preacher from the Holiness denomination. He tried to convince me that Mr. Cardine wasn't real. I told the preacher things about his own life, and that scared him enough to advise my mother to take me to a doctor. The doctor said I had to kill Mr. Cardine, and my parents asked me to let them know when he was gone. One day, while talking to some of the other beings, my mother became angry and spanked me. Later, my father did the same. Mr. Cardine was the dominant being in that other realm and could make the others leave. I couldn't hear him or see him physically. I just felt his presence. I would speak aloud to him, but I'm not sure how I understood him. I also saw other beings, some of which resembled melted piles of tar. These beings terrified me. They had no boundaries as we know them and could pass through walls. They usually appeared when my parents were arguing or drinking. Mr. Cardine could always make these tar-like beings disappear. The last time I interacted with Mr. Cardine was the day I told my parents he had fallen off the roof, broken his leg, and died. He instructed me to say this. He assured me he would always be with me, but warned I could no longer talk to him because of the punishment I received when caught speaking to him. Fast forward to when I was 39. It was July 14th, 1995, and my life took a drastic turn. For 21 years, I had been suffering from unexplained hives. On that day, after eating a peanut butter sandwich, I felt the familiar sensation of a hive forming. This one started below my navel, and it was the worst I had ever experienced. I watched in the mirror as the hive moved in a circle around my body, returning to its starting point. My body felt like it was on fire, and I knew I needed to get to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital, I felt faint. I walked through the ambulance door, and the nurse instructed me to fill out forms at admissions. I told her I could barely stand and requested a wheelchair. After some back and forth, she finally agreed to take my information. While seated, I told her I needed to lie down. As she said something, I lay on the floor. The next thing I knew, I was floating above my body, watching as they administered CPR. A voice asked, "Why have you worried so much in life?" I looked back at my body, and the voice asked again, "What good is it now?" I turned to find the source of the voice, and I could pass through the ceiling. I looked up into the night sky but didn't recognize the voice at first. My focus shifted to a star that began to grow larger until I was enveloped in its light. I saw colors swirling in a beautiful pattern. I understood that I was supposed to enter that space. The voice asked, "Have you completed everything you wanted in this life?" I thought of my unfinished wood carvings, and suddenly, I was back in my body. I could feel the weight of the nurse on my chest, performing compressions. I exclaimed, "What in the hell am I doing back here?" I was then moved into a room with a doctor who began inserting tubes into my arm. He asked how I was feeling and told me to stay awake. I relaxed, hearing Mr. Cardine's voice. He said, "This is what happens to evil people." I then saw a man I didn't know, his face filled with terror. He turned into a swirling light, and a tar-like being consumed him. I saw a woman follow, and many others appeared in quick succession. Mr. Cardine said, "This will happen to your mother." I woke up suddenly to the doctor shouting at me to hang on. He said, "Don't close your eyes." I muttered, "What in the hell am I doing back here again?" As I lay on the stretcher, Mr. Cardine said, "We are going on a journey." I saw the ceiling's material composition before everything went dark. I wasn't afraid because Mr. Cardine was with me. We encountered something massive and alive, communicating with Mr. Cardine in a language I didn't understand. Then, we met a second, even larger being. The two beings turned to face me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of love. I couldn't speak, but tried. Then, we moved again, and the last thing Mr. Cardine said was, "You've chosen life. You will suffer, but help others." I awoke again to the doctor shouting for me to stay awake. Since then, I no longer fear death. I'm not eager for it, but I look forward to returning to that place. The more I help others, the better my next home will be. This story was shared anonymously and occurred in 1995.